The conflict in the Middle East has intensified, with Israel launching airstrikes inside Lebanon, forcing civilians to flee their homes and killing hundreds of people. Hello and welcome to Roundtable. I'm Enda Brady. Now, the Israeli government is vowing to continue its attacks on Hezbollah targets in Lebanon until its citizens can return to northern Israel. The US and its allies have called for a ceasefire. But will they intervene, or does Lebanon risk becoming another Gaza?
Tens of thousands of people across southern Lebanon have been fleeing their homes as Israeli strikes killed hundreds of people, including children, amid the worst violence in decades.
They struck right next to our house and our building was shaking. We got very stressed. This is why we had to leave and we came here. We were told it's safe here. The situation is very tragic. The strikes were right next to us.
Tensions on the Israel-Lebanon border have been simmering for months, escalating after thousands of pagers and walkie-talkies used by Hezbollah exploded last week, killing dozens and injuring thousands of civilians. In retaliation, Hezbollah has launched rocket attacks into northern Israel, including a missile strike on Tel Aviv for the first time in history. The group targeted the Mossad headquarters with a ballistic missile, which was intercepted by the air defense system. Israel says Hezbollah has launched around 9,000 rockets and drones since last October. Meanwhile, Israel has conducted airstrikes targeting Hezbollah in Lebanon, including the capital Beirut. Fears of a wider conflict are growing, with world leaders and Europe urging restraint.
Gaza is a non-stop nightmare that threatens to take the entire region with it. Look no further than Lebanon. We should all be alarmed by the escalation. Lebanon is at the brink. The people of Lebanon, the people of Israel, and the people of the world cannot afford Lebanon to become another Gaza.
World powers continue to call for calm in the region, with the ongoing conflict in Gaza and now destruction on the streets of Lebanon. Can the escalation of war between Israel and Hezbollah be halted, and will the West intervene?
Well, let's meet our guests. Joining us from Beirut is Najat Aoun Saliba. She's a member of the Lebanese Parliament. And here with me in the studio, we have Peter Herbert. He's a human rights lawyer, former lead counsel at the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda. And Martin Smith, he is senior lecturer in defence and international affairs at the Royal Military Academy, that's in Sandhurst. You're all very welcome to Roundtable. Najat, I'll come to you first of all. Just tell me, how are people feeling in Lebanon right now?
First of all, we need to say that Lebanese people are very fearful of their lives. We condemn all the killing and the atrocity and inhumane way Israel has been bombing Lebanon with over 2,000 strikes that have killed over 600 people in the first few days. People also are seeing Lebanon being destroyed completely. Some villages are completely destroyed on the ground, and they are so worried that the scenario of Gaza is going to be repeated over and over again. We have seen also massive displacement of people from the south, and this is creating a humanitarian crisis in the country. And we have to also mention that since COVID, Lebanon has not been able to get back on its feet, because after COVID we had the Beirut non-nuclear biggest explosion of the century, and then after that we had the unrests that have started a year ago with between Israel and Hezbollah. So just to sum it up, I'm just saying that people are really devastated. They cannot believe and they cannot conceive the indiscriminate killing of Israel, but at the same time they are seeing their homes being destroyed in front of their eyes, and they had to flee for their lives. And this is really, really something. This is putting a huge burden on the country, and it is very difficult to cope with all of this.
Najat, you mentioned Gaza. Is that the big fear now, that Lebanon becomes Gaza 2.0?
Well, I don't think we're too far away from it. In the south, we have already villages that are completely down on the ground and deserted completely. A lot of people have left them, and we've seen the massive flee or migration from the south towards Mount Lebanon and the north. So it's already a déjà vu scenery that I hope it stops as soon as possible, because I don't think humanity at large wants to see another massacre and another devastating human lives and situation like the one we saw in Gaza. And this is extremely important. I mean, if we as human could not deal with the sceneries that we saw in Gaza, are we ready, or are we willing to see another scenery, another scenarios, the same that we saw in Gaza happening in Lebanon? I hope we don't, and I hope all human rights people and the international community would step up to stop this massacre that has been going on.
Najat, thank you. Martin, if we go back to 2006, Israel set out to dismantle Hezbollah. They went to war. They didn't manage it. What makes Benjamin Netanyahu think Israel can succeed this time?
Because I think the record from 2006 is actually mixed. Clearly, Israel did not dismantle Hezbollah beyond the point of no return, and indeed it's come back, and by some estimations it has at least 10 times more missiles in its inventory now than it did before the 2006 conflict. On the other hand, and before the 7th of October last year, the border between northern Israel and southern Lebanon, at least by relative standards, was quiet. It was under control, and the northern Israeli communities had a sufficient degree of security to be able to people there go about their daily lives. So I think Hezbollah clearly can't be eliminated altogether. And I think it's significant in that context that the official language that Israeli leaders are using is different in this context, whereas there's been a lot of talk about destroying Hamas in Gaza. The talk with regard to the northern front, from Israel's point of view, is about degrading and dismantling Hezbollah's capabilities. In other words, the specific capabilities and the willingness of Hezbollah leaders to continue to use its capabilities to threaten communities in the north of Israel. The bottom line here is, I think, Mr. Netanyahu is under significant and growing pressure from the northern Israeli communities. Don't forget, 70,000 or so Israelis have been displaced for most of the last year from the north.
And a lot of people in Lebanon as well.
A lot of people, yeah. I think 70,000 in Israel and then 90,000 and counting in southern Lebanon. So there is great human cost on both sides here. And from Mr. Netanyahu's point of view, I think he's calculating we have a viable strategy. We know that we can quieten Hezbollah down for quite a considerable period of time, because we managed to do that after 2006. And we need to do something, because otherwise the political pressure, particularly as the Gaza, well, there seems to be no end in sight in Gaza, the political pressure of two unresolved conflicts simultaneously might develop, if left untended, as it were, to the extent that Mr. Netanyahu's government becomes completely overwhelmed.
Peter, we keep hearing Israel saying it has the right to defend itself, but how does this stand in international law? I mean, is he breaking international law, what he's doing in Lebanon?
He has broken international law in Lebanon, he's broken it in Gaza, he's broken it in the West Bank. And really, he and many members of his cabinet ought to be tried as war criminals. These are crimes against humanity. They are disproportionate, they're indiscriminate, and they have significantly targeted civilian populations. And that is clear. And so when you're questioning the legality of what he and his colleagues have done in the IDF and in the cabinet, they have what's called command responsibility. They ought to be put on trial. And somewhere, at some time, they will be. And therefore, the international community is wringing its hands and worrying about this latest episode of violence. But actually, it only is happening because states, including Muslim states, on its borders like Egypt and Jordan and Saudi, are doing nothing. And essentially, this situation may have to get a lot worse before it gets better. I visited South Lebanon, and I pay tribute to the people of South Lebanon who have withstood this. But you guarantee there will be Hamas. You guarantee there will be Hezbollah for hundreds of years because you are creating that. The Nazis in Warsaw, in the Warsaw Ghetto, did not kill Judaism. And neither will the Israeli fascist government now kill the idea of freedom amongst Palestinian, Lebanese, and the people of the Middle East.
Thank you, Peter. Najat, talk to me about the Lebanese government. I mean, from an international perspective looking in, we don't see much leadership.
Yeah, that's an internal problem, of course, and also reflected a little bit on the international opinion. Internally, I think the warlords who have run the civil war for 50 years have taken over the government thereafter, and what they did is that they fueled disparity and they fueled sectarianism in the country, and then the country became so divided, not because humans or people resident in this country do not like each other. It's just because they are fed day and night hatred speeches, so that those warlords continue to have power. And this has led to a big defaulting on electing a president for 2 years. I think this is the responsibility of the Lebanese people and only the Lebanese people. And they should have elected a president back in September 2022. And they thought that they can get away with it and they can lure the international community by doing what they can to save this country. In fact, they were not doing this. As a member of the parliament, I really call on all the members of the parliament to convene today as per the constitution and elect a president, and without having a caretaker government who does not have a very firm stand on the state and the opinion of the state. We need to have a small cabinet, an emergency cabinet that look after the benefits of the people, all the people living in this country. So this is definitely a weak point in the negotiation and on any discussion that is going on internationally. And this has also weakened the Lebanese army forces, who cannot move without a very strong political will and political backup. So their bickering and their focus on their personal interest and personal political gain has weakened the country so much that we don't have the stamina and the position, the firm position that we need in order for us to carry on negotiations, international negotiations to save this country. That's a very important question, and that's something as change MPs who were elected after the 2019 revolution, we keep on calling for a strong state with a strong Lebanese army forces backed up by a government who really look after the people and start the reform the country needs. You know, we've been lingering in an economic collapse since 2019, and there is still no strong or sturdy plan, strategic plan to get the country out of this mess.
Thanks, Najat. Martin, just on that issue of the pager attack, how bad was that for morale for Hezbollah, that senior commanders, their commandants, lieutenants, and how damaging was that to Hezbollah?
I think in terms of morale, potentially very damaging, which was the main object of the attack. And going back to what is the Israeli strategy is not to eliminate all Hezbollah personnel. That's not possible. The Israeli strategy is to intimidate Hezbollah leaders to the extent that they agree to the Israeli government's demands, which is to redeploy and to accept limitations on what they can and cannot do and where they can and cannot dispose of their forces, so that the northern Israeli communities which have currently been displaced are able to go back to their homes. So I think there's the physical dimension of this conflict, which we've been talking about, and of course that's important and that's very brutal and very costly. But I think there's a second element here, which is the psychological dimension and the pager attack. And the reason, to go back to your question, why I think that will prove to be so debilitating, not physically debilitating so much as in terms of its longer-term impact psychologically on supporters and leaders of Hezbollah. And that's precisely what Israel is counting on. That's the effect that the Israeli government intends that particular attack and that particular method of warfare, from putting it that way, to actually have. We won't necessarily see the impacts and the effects of that immediately, but I think over the longer term, perhaps measured in weeks or maybe even months, then that may well help to condition the, shall we say, negotiating environment and making Hezbollah leaders more willing to come to some sort of accommodation with Israel.
Peter, looking at Netanyahu, is there a feeling that all of these conflicts are keeping him in his job? Because as soon as Israel is at peace again, there will be an inquiry into what happened a year ago, the intelligence failures leading up to October the 7th, and he will be booted out in disgrace because of that.
Yes, I mean, he and anybody associated with him have a shelf life that lasts as long as the next dead Palestinian or Lebanese and the next rocket attack. Once that finishes, he will himself either be placed on an inquiry, he will cease to be the Prime Minister and the leadership. But I have to disagree with one point that's been made vehemently. You cannot, as human beings, blow up children, innocents, and expect that will lead to an easier path towards peace. It will not. What is violence goes around, comes around. And so there will be no Jewish person or institution in the world that feels safer because of the pager attack. They will not. Because they know that what can happen one way can happen the other. And therefore, men of violence on all sides really have to take stock and let, in a sense, the women take the lead, as they should do, because these wars are driven by men. They're not driven generally by women. They're driven by men on all sides. And in fact, it's one of the ironies of our society, modern society, that we don't learn the lessons of history. Violence begets violence. It does not beget peace. And therefore, there might be a small window of opportunity that brings people to the negotiation table. It will not last long, I guarantee.
Netanyahu, then, for your view, he has no interest in a peace.
He's no interest whatsoever. He just, I think, in recent times, how many times, I've lost count, he put new conditions on the peace deal in Gaza. He's not interested. He will do the same with Lebanon. And there will not be a deal until he is either out of power or removed. And neither of those seem to be in the agenda of the Israeli people or power.
Najat, just give us the Lebanese interpretation of Netanyahu's position and why he pushes on with these conflicts.
Well, I would like to agree with Peter that violence can bring only violence from the other side, and hatred cannot solve any problem that we're facing as human beings on this planet. This is very important. And also thank you, Peter, for stressing out that all of these wars are led and conducted by men, orchestrated by men, and we really need to have women on the table so that we can really balance what the humanity needs in order for us to really reflect the opinions of men and women. Women need to be there on the decision table. So of course in Lebanon we understand that this person has done so many massacres to Gaza, and they have killed children in hospitals, in schools, in shelters, and everywhere without even feeling any wrongdoing. And we saw the masses of bodies being buried all at once. This is what we are afraid of. It's a killing machine that will not feel any regret by killing children, women, elderlies, or otherwise. So that's why we call on the international community, and we call on everybody who really want for us to keep going as a human, to think about diplomatic solutions. And I want to emphasize that the Palestinian problem or the Palestinian massacre has been going on for over 70 years. I mean, these people are resilient, yes, of course, but they have been living in dire conditions for many years. So when we look at the problem today, we don't want to look at war right now in front of us. We really need to look at the causes of this war and the causes of this imbalance and inequality that has led to where we are today. I hope the world has heard the Palestinians. They have seen their sadness, their discrimination, and the inequality that they have been living in. And we call on everybody to really stand by the Palestinian cause and call for the justice to be served. At the same time, I think Lebanese people feel a lot with the Palestinian cause, and that's why they are carried away by their emotions. And I believe that we really need to protect our country at the same time, so we can protect the Palestinian cause on the long run. This is what we call for. We call for diplomatic efforts, diplomatic negotiations, and we also call for internally for the all parties in Lebanon to respect the constitution and go now to the parliament to elect a president and a functioning cabinet in order for us to start looking after the people. And we have 500,000 people displaced as of today, and they are distributed in schools and with their families that are living outside the south, and this is going to create another humanitarian crisis in Lebanon.
Thanks, Najat. Martin, talk to me about Hezbollah. How different are they then as a fighting machine compared to Hamas? What are the Israelis getting themselves into here?
Much bigger. The short answer to the question, Enda, is they are much bigger. They are militarily more capable, both in terms of the ground forces that they're potentially able to bring to bear, many of which have been battle-hardened in the course of the Syrian civil war. But in particular, there's no comparison with what Hamas has compared to Hezbollah in terms of its missile stockpiles. So, all told, Hezbollah is a much more, I think, securely entrenched and a much more militarily capable entity, which is why, going back to something we discussed earlier, I think it is significant that whereas the thrust of the Israeli approach has been to seek to destroy, and a belief that Hamas can be, functionally at least, completely eliminated in Gaza, and of course we can discuss and debate whether that is the case or not. But I think there is an acceptance that whilst it might be comforting from the Israeli perspective to believe that Hezbollah could somehow be eliminated from the equation altogether, history strongly suggests that that is not the case, and it certainly isn't going to be the case today.
And so they have a much bigger tunnel network as well.
They have a much bigger tunnel network as well, and we've seen just how difficult Israel, the IDF has found it to deal with the Hamas tunnel network in a much smaller area of the Gaza Strip.
Peter, what prospect is there of the international community then putting such pressure on Netanyahu that he has to stop?
I think it's not looking good. I think there has been no mobilization by the Egyptian army, which I met back in 2011, or the Jordanian army, or any of the vast forces that could be deployed, even mobilized, to call Israel to account. I'm not suggesting that they do anything, but even the fact that they saber rattle would stop a lot of what is going on. And I think it's ironic that I spare a thought for the hundreds of thousands of Syrian refugees that I saw in South Lebanon that are still there in tents and have no means of escape. They are there. And also, having seen South Lebanon, I'm aware that the territory is mountainous. It is one of the most easily defensible parts of the Middle East. And therefore, as an invader, you enter at your peril. And the mountains are littered with old Crusader forts and the graves of Crusaders and Arab people who fought many, many years ago. So I would not invite Israel and Netanyahu to compound their criminality and their fascism and their apartheid state by entering South Lebanon.
Peter, Martin and Najat in Beirut, thank you all so much for your contribution to this roundtable. Remember, you can see more discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. Just search for Roundtable TRT World. But for now, from me, Enda Brady, and all of the team here, goodbye and thank you for watching.